So today we're going to be studying the book of Daniel, and the title of today's lesson is Faithful to God in Babylon. God rewards those who choose to follow his ways. I'll just go ahead and read the introduction here from the teacher's guide, and it says, the first chapter in the book of Daniel follows the plight of the young Jewish men exiled to Babylon, who registered religious culture assimilation despite intense pressure to do so. Determined to uphold the Jewish religious vows as much as possible, they chose not to eat the royal food provided, adhering instead to the diet consistent with their faith. Their commitment led to remarkable health and vitality, setting them apart from those around them. Their loyalty was rewarded by God with outstanding wisdom, understanding, and skills, surpassing all the peers and earning high recognition in the royal court. This lesson emphasizes the power of unwavering faithfulness. So that's what we want to do. We don't want to waver, let our faithfulness waver when opposition comes against us, and sometimes we will do that. So what does it mean to be a believer in the midst of an unbelieving world that we live in today? How can we live out our faith when Christians are not in positions of influence and power? How can we remain faithful to God when our culture is influenced by other religious systems of belief? Throughout history, Christians have struggled with this dilemma. The book of Daniel addresses the questions and more. Daniel speaks to the challenge of being in the world but not of the world. I know we're all familiar with that New Testament scripture. The Old Testament tells us of many religious people besides Daniel who remained faithful to God throughout oppressed and oppressed by the powers of this world. For example, Enoch and Noah walked with God in the most of corrupt and evil societies, and Abraham lived by faith among the unbelieving Canaanites. The book of Daniel, some people say the book of Daniel can be summarized in two words, and those two words are miracles and mysteries. So the first 1 through 6 chapters talks about some of the miracles that was done in Daniel, but then the rest of the chapter from 7 through 12 talks about the mysteries and tells us about things to come to pass and things that's going to take place. But today, the unit lessons that we're going to study on in the book of Daniel is the first 6 chapters, which are the miracles of God. So we're not going to get into any of the prophecies or any of the end-time teachings in the book of Daniel in these sessions. We're just going to be studying about the first four chapters. So I invite you to help me today. If you got any comments, I'll probably need all the help I can get, and I'll just get started here and do the best I can. So I guess we'll start in chapter 1, verse 1. I'll just go ahead and read 1 through 5. It says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried unto the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels unto the treasure house of his God. And notice how he brought them to his God. So Nebuchadnezzar's God was not the God of Daniel, was it? It was other strange gods. And there was many strange gods in the land, weren't they? Where'd they come from? How'd they get these strange gods? Jesus was the only one true God that started out in the Bible. You don't ever think of where did they come from? How'd they get all these other strange gods? Where'd they get the idea from them? Huh? Oh, the Lord gave these nations over to strange gods. Huh? He allowed it to happen because they didn't serve. But Israel is his inheritance. These other lands he gave over to the strange gods. And you can study out who those strange gods were, but I'll leave it up to you because most of you probably wouldn't believe it anyway. There's a lot of mysterious things in the Word of God and lots of things he just hints about. But if you read other secular Second Temple literature and history things, you'll understand a lot more of the Bible. I know people don't like reading stuff outside the Bible, but history records things that happened outside the Bible and what their thinking was and where they got their ideas for things. But anyway, we'll skip over that. But there was other gods and other strange gods, and even their names you see was dedicated to these strange gods, just like the Hebrew names was dedicated to the God Jehovah. So, and they brought these vessels into his God's house, and the king spake unto Asaphanaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom were no blemish, but were favored, skillful in all wisdom, cunning in knowledge, understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. So what were they wanting to do? How come he wanted them? He's smart. He had a strategy. He wanted to teach them in their customs and their practice and their ways. So he wanted to do what? He wanted to reprogram them or re-educate them or brainwash them. You think it don't happen today? But anyway, this chapter we might go a little different than what most of you would think we would go. But anyway, we see here, it says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. So it says in the 3rd year of King Jehoiakim, he said he came to Babylon and besieged it, or he took it. So God, what? Allowed it to happen. God had protected Israel and took care of Israel lots of times. But sometimes it comes, because you know Jehoiakim, you can read about all the bad things he did. So sometimes God has to turn us over to what? Over to judgment. Even you as Christians, sometimes he has to turn us over to judgment. But yet he still doesn't forsake us. So this was a time of judgment upon... Now, I'm going to go off one little path here. But notice it says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim. If you got your Bible, if you want to turn over to Jeremiah chapter 46. Let's look at verse 1. The word of the Lord came unto Jeremiah the prophet. See, Jeremiah prophesied during this time about how things were going to happen and how they were going to be carried away captive. And Jeremiah spake, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah, and the prophet spake against the Gentiles, and against Egypt, and against the army of Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, which was by the river Euphrates, and ever how you say that there, Carchemish, which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, smote in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah. He ordered the buckler and the shield and draw nigh to the battle, the hardness of the horses. But anyway, you can read that. So what did it say here? Did you notice anything about those scriptures? Oh, in the 4th year. What did he tell us over here in Daniel? In the 3rd year. Now, did the Bible make a mistake? I'll let you chew on that for a few minutes. Huh? I know most people don't try to tie any of this stuff together. I mean, but anyway, we'll see here. But we can see here that that starts out here in this Daniel that tells us that Daniel and his friends explains why they were exiled into Babylon. It said in the 3rd year of King of Jeroboam, which was 605 B.C., in those days the prophet Jeremiah was warning the leaders and the priests and the people that their unfaithfulness would bring God's judgment in the form of a Babylonian invasion. You can read that in Jeremiah chapter 20, verse 4 through 5. But they did not believe the warnings. Sound familiar? Just like people today, how we're told to what? We're told to flee the wrath to come. But a lot of people just ignore those warnings, don't they? And they'll have to enter that wrath, won't they? So God's judgment. So what it says here, in the year it came to pass, and the word there it says he said, or I should have wrote that down, but the Hebrew word there, I forget what it is, but it means they begin to set out after them. So it says Nebuchadnezzar recently had defeated Egypt in battle and led siege to Jerusalem. Now, you can read the full story of Nebuchadnezzar's attack and victory told in 2 Kings chapter 24. But what you'll find out is that he started out to Jerusalem in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim. But on the way, he went first. And it told you right there in Jeremiah, he went toward Egypt and had a battle. He first destroyed Egypt and conquered Egypt. And then from there, he done what? he made his way on down to Jerusalem. And by the time he got there, he was in his 4th year of his reign. But he started out in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim's reign to take them. But on the way, matter of fact, I know it says King Nebuchadnezzar, and if you really study this out and get you a good Bible scholar, Nebuchadnezzar actually wasn't even king when he first started out. His father actually died while he was in battle on Jerusalem and had to come back and leave his generals to finish it up. But anyway, that's just stuff that most people just skip over and don't even try to. But you can just do whatever you want to. But anyway, we see here that's why there's a little difference there. He started out to get him in the 3rd year of his reign, but he didn't make it until the 4th year of his reign to make it on down to Jerusalem, because he stopped at Egypt and defeated them. So the time of judgment had come, and God had warned Israel repeatedly judgment was coming unless they repented of their idolatry. When Jerusalem was surrendered, Nebuchadnezzar entered the city and robbed the temple of its gold and of its silver and carried them into Babylon. Well, into Shinar, it says, but Shinar is just another word for Babylon. When we talk about Mesopotamia, you read those things, we're all talking about Babylon. When we talk about Shinar or Mesopotamia. And he placed the vessels in a treasury of his god, and his god was either Baal or the Babylonian god Nabu. Because a lot of people says it was god Nabu because his name, Nebuchadnezzar, N-E-B-U, is the god Nabu. Stands for Nabu. So when it actually means Nabu, protect my son, or that's what his name meant. Nabu, protect the boundary. So people were named just like the Israelites. These other people were named after people named their children after what they wanted them to be, or characteristics they wanted them to have, or what they wanted to do for God or their God, whatever their God might be. See the Antichrist always imitate God, and they always try to replicate God, and he uses God's word to deceive people. And he tries to make you take it out of context and different things. But anyway, the act of robbing the temple of his treasures was Nebuchadnezzar's way of displaying his superiority over the God of Israel. So after 18 years, he returned to Jerusalem and burnt the city and the temple. And ironically, it was completely unaware that he was only being an instrument in God's hands to bring judgment upon them, and he didn't realize that. So when compared to the defeat of Jerusalem and the exile of the people, the loss of the temple vessels might appear insignificant. However, the mention of the temple vessels foreshadows events in chapter 5 in Daniel, which we'll study about later, where some of these vessels play an important role in Belshazzar's feast and his ultimate demise. So God had a purpose in all these things that he was doing. So we see here that we might say that one of the things they was doing, Nebuchadnezzar took not only gold and silver, but he also took what? Captives. He wanted the leading citizens and princes and craftsmen and priests and carried them away into Babylon. Among these captives was Daniel and his 3 friends. And you can read that over in 2 Kings chapter 24. You can read about all the people they took, all the different. They wanted craftsmen and fine men. So he wanted people without blemish, like I said, good-looking, handsome, smart, intelligent, because he wanted to use them. Really, what they wanted to use them for different things. Really, what they wanted to do, really what these kings did, they brought these people in that they thought were good and smart, and they tried to indoctrinate them or brainwash them into their way of life. They taught them their principles, their cultures, their religion, and they taught them all these different things. And that was their strategy, that they would get allegiance to them, and they would groom them to their way of living, their way of thinking, so they could do what? Then they would send them back to their homeland and let them rule for Babylon, their homeland. That way the people wouldn't do what? What was the smarts in doing that? What was the thinking in doing that? The people wouldn't rebel against them. If the people they took captive come back and started teaching them other things, the Babylonian ways, then that was the way these kings and people did things then. They brought them in and they taught them their cultures and their customs. And so really Daniel was what we might call today, in today's terms, what we call what he was and his 3 friends. And not only Daniel, they took many others along with them, but this is just the ones they may talk, but they would be considered what? War hostages, right? They were hostages. So most time when you get taken hostage in war, they take you somewhere and beat you and put you in where you can't have any contact with anybody, and they just treat you bad. And that's always like war hostages. I can't say that word. But Daniel, he actually in the end became the prime minister of Babylon and become one of the most trusted advisors to the king. So we see how that God showed him favor in captivity and being a war hostage. So Daniel's captives tried to win him over to their side and to their culture and to their practices. Because that was his strategy, and that was their intent, and that's what they planned on doing. And they tried to do that, but we see it didn't work with Daniel and his three friends. He decided he was going to remain faithful to God. He wasn't going to let them re-educate him and brainwash him. So what they did, they tried to take the best of hostages and make them civil citizens and servants there and teach them and train them and bring them up in their ways and their principles and their customs, so they and their philosophies and their science, so they could go back later and do these things. So we see that Daniel didn't allow these things to happen to him. He decided he was going to stay faithful in this secular world. That's the way we need to be. We need to be secure in what? In our relationship with God. Now we're going to especially have to do that during what? During these end times. You want to be secure in your relationship with God. So lots of times, if we're away from home like these boys was, and away from the temple, away from Jerusalem, they might be tempted to do what? Go with the flow. Give in to temptation. You get away from church and get away from your home and get out, and then you're more tempted to just say, I'm just going to do this and not worry about what God said to do. Huh? And we might do it sometimes. Maybe you don't, Macy. Maybe you might have a lot better. All people do not have the same secure relationship with God as others do. Just because they don't have the same secure relationship doesn't mean they're not part of God's family. Huh? There's some 100-fold Christians, some 20-fold Christians, 30-fold Christians. We all need to bring forth and produce fruit, don't we? But anyway, we'll see here. So, let's see what else we can say about this. It says the young men were under the authority of Ashpenaz, the master of the king's eunuchs. And here it says the eunuch here, the word means, the official word here in Saras, the Hebrew word means he was a palace official, and he was the highest of the palace officials. So we see the book of Daniel with the meaning of great, chief, or head. Therefore, Ashpenaz was the chief of the staff, or the chief of the court of officials. The Babylonian king instructed him to identify the most promising candidates for inclusion in the royal court. So they were seeking out those who were studied in science, those who had wisdom, those who had knowledge, that they could be part of the king's court. And the king wanted only the best and brightest young men to work in his palace. They must be handsome in appearance, no blemish, but good looking. They must be highly intelligent, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge, and quick in understanding. The words wisdom, knowledge, and understanding are significant throughout the book of Daniel. So we see that we see what he was looking for. The most impressive candidates would be taught the language and literature of the Chaldeans, and the most prominent of Babylon. However, the Chaldeans also used this name. The word Chaldeans was also used for the name of people who were magicians and divinators. They practiced what? The occult. So they brought them captive, and they were going to teach them what? Occultic practices. And to a certain extent, they had to participate in. Well, you may not believe that, but encompass all these categories. So they would be indoctrinated in the Babylonian culture, worldview, and religion, which included forbidden occult practices. The forced assimilation raised questions about the challenges they would face. The initial education of Hebrew youth would last 3 years. So for 3 years, they were going to educate these people. They were going for 3 years. They were going to educate them, teach them in their philosophy and in their sciences. And they said the young men were to be given the best food and drink that Babylon had to offer. It was the same food and wine enjoyed by the king himself. So most people in captivity, if you're a war hostage today, they take you in and give you the best of the food. And you'd be lucky if you get a cracker and a glass of water a day. But they were going to treat them good, wasn't it? So it'd been easy to give in to that, wasn't it? Just to suck it right up and go right along with it. Now I'm better off here than I was back over, and just like when he come out of Egypt. So you can see what kind of temptations they had on them. So anybody got any comments for we?
It would be hard to give that up once you had it too.
Yeah.
Think about it. You had the best of the best, and all of a sudden you didn't practice them all. So it would make them want to stay in that position.
Yeah.
I think, Henry, one thing that should be pointed out here is that we better never, ever lose the fear of God.
Right.
Never, ever. Because when we begin to lose the fear of God, then we begin to slide, usually.
Yeah.
And
That's an excellent point.
God. I think Daniel just maybe didn't love him just to love him, but he really feared the Lord.
Yeah.
And that's why that they were able to withstand what
Yeah. That's
Come
what,
out on top in the end.
that's why the Bible tells us the beginning of wisdom is what? Yeah. Well, I better go on. We're running out of time. Let's go on down to verse 6. It says, now among these, let's talk about they brought these captives. So now we're going to go on to, they brought lots of people. But the ones we're going to study about is these four men here. It says, now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and that, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names. For he gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah Shadrach, and to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. So now mainly that's what we know these characters as what? Shadrach. And that was what? What are those names? Babylonian names. See, now that's part of the brainwashing. They took away their Hebrew names, which meant their roots in Yeshua and Yahweh. They gave him names that represented the Babylonian gods. So they could try to completely wash away their identity and start them over from scratch. And that happens to people all the time in places you were never aware of. And you'd be surprised how much it happens in business, how they brainwash people. How to get good salesmen. All they think about, all they imagine. And then they're good at it. Make lots of money at it. Some of the best jobs you can get is being a salesman places. But you ought to go to you ought to watch some of the seminars, some things they go to, and how they pump you up. It's almost like cheerleading. They get you hyped up, which is a good thing, I guess. I mean, as long as you do better in your career. But I mean that. But anyway, I'll not go down that path. So we see here these three friends. They tried to rename them, and we'll talk. The Hebrew names reminded the young men of their Israelite heritage. The name Daniel means God is my judge, and Mishael means who is like God, and Hananiah means Yahweh is gracious, and Azariah means Yahweh is my helper. So you see how their Hebrew names talked about the God of Israel, the God of heaven and earth. Now we notice that by signing them names, they tried to change their life, but did God ever do that? Yeah, He did it, didn't He? God done the same thing. Here they go, huh? You think these gods that rule our nations, where'd they come from? You know, fallen angels rules all these other countries and stuff, don't you? Those that rebel against God. That's why people. Come on, we got to understand the spiritual realm. We understand the spiritual world. If we understand the spiritual, we see why things happen in the natural. Huh? Everything happens in the natural is because of the battles that's going on in the spiritual. Even when Daniel prayed for his dream, for the interpretation, something, what happened? What withstood him? The prince of Grecia withstood him. And he could, And he had to send Michael the archangel down to help. You think there ain't battles and wars going on? We think we're battling here. If you could see the spiritual warfare that goes on, we just can't understand things that God. I mean, we think we do. I think I do sound, but Lord, when you get done, you don't. I mean, there's so much. It's beyond imagination. We talk about all the beings that God created before He created heaven. All these beings. It's about 7 different beings if you read about them in the Bible. The wheel in the middle and the wheels, and these angels and all these heads. But when did God create these? I mean, see, God's been creating. You might think He just created in the 6 days, but little mind if you think that way. In my opinion, I'm just giving you my opinion. But anyway, huh? I don't know if he's the first one or not, but he was the anointed cherub. But anyway, we'll not get into all that. So let's go on down here and talk about the alternative of the names Daniel and his friends also represented a kind of transformation, but a negative one. It reflected Babylon's deliberate effort to redefine their identities and to sever their ties with their heritage and to impose upon them a new culture. So secular scholars are really uncertain about the meaning of the Babylonian names, but it is certain. Now, some tell you different things, but certain Babylonian ideas and concepts oppose the Hebrews. Like Belteshazzar, which is one name they give to Daniel, was may Baal protect his life. That's the reason that's the Baal part of it. May Baal protect his life. So he's no longer God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now Baal was going to protect him. And Shadrach, which means the great scribe, or the commander of Ahu. And Ahu was the moon god that they served there. And Meshach perhaps means the guest of the king, and Abednego, the servant of Nabu. And Nabu is sometimes called Nebo. So Nabu was another god. There was all kinds of gods. And not writing and learning. Yeah. Nebu. Now, see, in the Greek cultures, they had gods about everything, didn't they? Now, you think these gods influenced their culture? Almost certainly they did. But God allowed it, didn't he? Because Israel was his inheritance. Israel's the ones he's really watching over. I'm just telling you the way I see it. You may see it different, but no. So anybody else got any comments on that? Or I'll try to get through here. All right. I didn't.
Why did Daniel keep his name?
He didn't. I know. I don't know why we do that. Because Belteshazzar is hard to say or hard to remember. And I can't pronounce his name. My teeth's a buck. I do well to say my name. I can't even say my name. I tell people I can hardly say the word Alan. People can't understand when I say I have to tell them 2 or 3 times. I mean, I can't help it. I'm not a good talker. But I hate to tell somebody my name because I have a hard time saying it. I must have something wrong somewhere, but I know I got something wrong somewhere, but lots of things wrong. But anyway, let's go on to verse 8. It says, but Daniel, but that's a good question. I thought the same thing. We always say Shadrach, Meshach. It was Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach. We don't say Belshazzar and Belteshazzar and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But maybe we should start doing that. I don't like calling them by their Babylonian names. Yeah, you're exactly right.
Maybe you should start telling them your name is Alan.
Yeah. Oh, well. But anyway, it says, Daniel proposed in his heart that he will not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. So Daniel decided in his heart that he wasn't going to defile himself. Was that an attitude we need to have today? We need to have that attitude today that we would not defile ourselves, neither our body or anything else, our customs or our way. We don't need to defile ourselves, but lots of times people do, don't they? So we. So, think he had to be bold in doing that?
Yeah,
he had to be.
Submissive in some way,
Yeah.
And I guess that was the way that the Lord instructed him.
He found a favor with the eunuch too, who was over that.
Mm-hmm.
So, had he not been given that favor with the eunuch, he may not have
So God was working behind the scenes the whole time, helping them out, wasn't he? Now, if we decide we're not going to defile ourselves with the secular world, God will help us out, won't he? And he'll be with us more, and he'll do like he did Daniel. But lots of times we make bad decisions and bad choices. How many of us like to go back and make some choices over we've done now? Huh? But anyway. Yeah. Compromise God's commandments and his laws. That's the first thing we'll start doing when we get away from God, away from home, away from the house of God.
And we find a way to justify ourselves.
Oh, yeah. I've done it. Maybe you haven't, but yeah. But God's always faithful. Sometimes, even though when we're not faithful, we need to depend upon God. So we see here that so they were going to bring him the best of the king's food and the best of his wine. So you can imagine that, when you see these kings and, just like Donald Trump last night, and you seen the big dinner they was having, they probably had the best of food, the best of wine, the best of everything. That would have been what? Tempting to you. Wouldn't that have been tempting to you? Huh? Especially if you like to eat like I do. So that would probably been tempting. Maybe it didn't tempt him, but he decided, made up his mind that he wasn't going to defile himself with the king's meat. And probably why he didn't. And the reason he didn't want to do that was why? Because of the Mosaic law, their dietary restrictions that they had. They were only supposed to eat certain kinds of meat, and it had to be prepared a certain way, and all the blood had to be drained out of it. So they knew these things wouldn't be kosher. So he knew if he ate of the king's table that he would be defiling himself. So he decided he wasn't going to want to defile himself. And another reason he may not want to eat it because most of this food was probably what? Been dedicated to a pagan god. Because they dedicated their food to pagan gods. And he knew that had probably had happened. So now Paul talked about that, and I made a note here. Paul talked concerning these things about. Paul said, when you go to the market to buy meat, what do you say to do? Pay for it. Just buy it. That's exactly what he told them. Don't ask if this meat has been offered unto pagan gods. Why do you say not to do that? For your conscience sake. That's what he said. When you went to a friend's house and they set something for you to eat, what do you say to do? Eat it and don't ask no questions. Why? At least you offend them and for your conscience sake. Because now if somebody said this before, you say, now this has been offered to pagan gods. Now if you went ahead and eat it, your conscience would have bothered you later. He said, for conscience sake, don't ask no questions. So people say, wow, that's some weird things to read in the Bible. That's what he told them to do, didn't he? So when you went to the market, went to the butcher's to get your meat, don't ask if it's been offered to idols. Just buy it and don't ask no questions. Just pray over it. I guess just pray over it, and that's how you sanctify your food. But see, I just brought that up. But anyway, we see here that he didn't want to defile himself. So he got brave here. We'll go on to talk about the part you've already talked about here. So Daniel made a resolve to be faithful, and he wasn't going to allow this heathen culture to take away his faith. That's the way we should be today. A lot of times we allow the secular world to do what? Take away our faith. And it will, just like that. And it will, not all at once, just a little at a time. That's the way the enemy comes to us. He don't come to us, he don't try to overwhelm us with sin, does he? He don't try to overwhelm us with things, do really bad things. He wants to just chip away at it. He wants to do this and do that and disobey that. Next thing you know, you begin to wonder whether I'm even a Christian or not. And that's the way the enemy works. So let's go on and read. It says, now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. Oh, he was in tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. A lot of people probably read that and say, see there, talking about what? Homosexuality. He loved and had tender love for him. They was probably partners. Huh? That's how the world will probably read that. I mean, but he just mean he loved him. He admired him, and he thought very highly of him. He says, and the prince of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear the Lord, which hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse than the children which are in the court? Then shall he make me endanger my head to the king. And then Daniel said to Melzar. Melzar was the one that the other eunuch had put these men under. Prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. So he said, instead of us eating from the king's table, getting the best meat, the best steak, the best T-bone, the best prime rib, and the best wine you got, let us have pulse, which was basically vegetables and grain and fruits and nuts and that type of stuff. And he said, let us eat that for 10 days, and then let our countenance be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat from the portion of the king's table, and as thou seest, deal with thy servants. He says, however how you see us, then you deal with us. So he was putting a challenge out there to him, wasn't he? So he consented to them in this manner and proved them 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, their countenance appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat at the portion of the king's meat. So Daniel, when he decided he wasn't going to defile himself, he was brave enough to step up and ask the eunuchs to allow them to stick with their dietary and eat vegetables and nuts and fruits and those type of things. And he said, just allow us to do it for 10 days, and then you look at us and you look at everybody that's eating from the king's table and you tell us. Because this servant over them, he feared Nebuchadnezzar was a mean man. And he feared for his head. He said, I fear for my head. But he thought so much of Daniel, he agreed to do that. And he agreed to allow them to go and do that. So it was a great test. So Daniel had to do what? He was trusting in God, that God would take care of him and his three friends if they stayed according to the Mosaic dietary program they're supposed to, that they would be better looking and in better shape than those who eat from the king's table. Now, just telling us we should all be vegetarians.
It goes with protein, it's supposed to make them more muscular. Think about it.
Yeah.
And Daniel's didn't have any protein in it, other than the fruit and vegetables, so it would build up their body, so to speak. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think if you think about how clever or smart or whatever God given, Daniel could have rebelled and not eaten at all.
Yeah.
But he devised a plan. Think about that.
Yeah.
Like almost like a bargain. You know, you do this and let's see.
So
I
he-
mean, on his behalf, to me, it speaks of his stubbornness.
So he was already demonstrating that God had anointed him what? With wisdom and knowledge. So the Holy Spirit probably was already working in his life, showing him and directing him. Our time's about up. But anyway, we see here that's why he questioned, and the eunuch agreed to do that. So after the 10 days, they appeared fatter and better than all the rest of the children. So I'll go to the last part here. So we know that what I said before, God's way is always what? The best way. God's way is always the best way. And the greatest reassurance is coming to those who serve God in the end time. So we'll see that we need to, remember I said before, when God tells us to do something, God instructs us to do something, it's always what? For our own best. That's why God's way is always the best. But sometimes the flesh wants to rebel against God's way because we think our way is better, don't we? We think we know better than God. And if we think we do, then we'll give an account for that. It says, and as for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill and all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. So we see here that Nebuchadnezzar, when he was really impressed with these young men who possessed wisdom and knowledge and skills and had qualities valued by the Babylonians. And the 4 youths, however, possessed more than natural human abilities. They possessed charismatic gifts. Though not stated directly, the Holy Spirit bestowed upon them the gift of wisdom and the gift of knowledge. The fact that true wisdom initiates with God. Spirit-filled believers are empowered to speak and act with wisdom, knowledge, and understanding that surpasses the wisdom of the world. So that's the way we should be. Now, a lot of times when we encounter a lot of worldly people, secular, they put a lot of Christians on the rail, don't they? And get them to not even know think they don't know what they believe sometimes. So that's why we need to study God's Word. So Daniel had a special gift of understanding, the ability to understand visions and dreams, and we'll see how that comes in later in some of the things that we read. So I'll read this part here. This is from Charles Spurgeon, the comment he had made. He said, wisdom is the right use of knowledge. A lot of people have knowledge, but they don't know how to use it, do they? We can have a lot of knowledge, but not the wisdom of how to properly use it. To know is not to be wise. Many men know a great deal, and are all the greater fools for it. I think he's talking about me. There is no fool so great as a knowing fool. But to know how to use knowledge is to have wisdom. So let's get knowledge and let's get wisdom from God that we may know how to use that knowledge properly. So sometimes we use it the wrong way. It says, now at the end of the days the king had said, bring them in. The prince of the eunuchs brought them before Nebuchadnezzar, and the king communed with them, and among them all found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king, and all the manners of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them not only better, but what? 10 times better than all the magicians, astrologers that were in all his realm. Not only are they smarter than all the rest of the Babylonians they brought captive, they were smarter in wisdom and knowledge than his own people, than his own musicians and his own astrologers. Because he had magicians and he had astrologers there. I mean, and they had occultic practices. Now Daniel used his, but he wasn't from the cult that he was getting his, but it was from God, wasn't it? See, the occult imitates God's thing. The cult they do spiritual things, but it's from the wrong spirit. Ikamba, shantama ileo kamale ishala rotama hasintea. Well, we have to be prepared. We better have the spirit of discernment if we ain't careful. But if you better judge the spirits when they come with you. Bad spirits will try to, other spirits will try to come and get in. They'll try to possess you. They'll try to get a hold of you. Holy. Let me read you something. I thought my Bible had a commentary, and I thought it was interesting, and then I'll shut up. It says, to the Babylonians, we owe the exact measurements of the lunar and solar cycles, of the tracing of the paths of the planets, the division of the circle into 360 degrees, the designation of the constellations, notably those of the zodiac. Daniel was no doubt trained in all these sciences. The inscriptions show that there was a special palace school with elaborate arrangements for special education. But these ancient Greeks and that's where we get our mathematics and we get a lot of science and we study astrology. But the wrong, if you use it with the wrong spirit, you're in the occult. But see, Daniel's wisdom come from God and from the Holy Spirit. The cult tries to mimic that and tries to mock that. So I'm done. If you got any, but we just see that. So we see we're showing here in history how Daniel got his start and what happened to him. So anybody else got any comments? And I'm going to sit down. All right.